Hey everyone! If you enjoyed this video, the full version is available on Patreon. I'll be uploading all my content there going forward.
Chapter 1. Dear Godfathers, please feel free to comment after reading. If you have any suggestions or if I have made any mistakes, please point them out in the chapter comments. I will read everyone's comments carefully. East Sea, Goa Kingdom, Mount Kalbo. Boom! A pale bolt of lightning tore through the pitch-black night, and torrential rain poured down like a celestial river overflowing its banks, pounding into the dense primeval forest. In this terrible weather, where even visibility is completely obscured by the rain, a wild chase is unfolding deep within the Kalbo Mountains. A mutated saber-toothed tiger, over 5 meters long and covered in hard scales, was running frantically through the mud in terror. It was the overlord of this forest, but now, only despair remained in its cold, vertical pupils. It's running for its life. Ha ha ha! Don't run away, big cat! Didn't you just want to eat me? A loud laugh, still carrying the naivety of a boy, yet wildly unrestrained, suddenly came from above the treetop atop the saber-toothed tiger's head. Bang! A thick tree trunk was instantly snapped in two by the violent force. Accompanied by a gale, a black-haired boy who looked to be only about 10 years old, shirtless, fell from the sky like a meteorite, crashing straight in front of the saber-toothed tiger. The boy had slightly curly black hair and a few freckles on his cheeks. Although he was only 10 years old, his muscles were as firm as a cheetah's, and even as the cold rain lashed against his body, wisps of hot white steam rose from them. In his hand, he gripped a heavy, broad-bladed iron sword that was riddled with nicks and hadn't even been sharpened. There was no stance as if he were drawing his sword, nor any particularly skillful sword techniques. The boy simply grinned, revealing an excited smile. The next second, he pushed off with both legs, instantly creating a deep crater in the mud beneath his feet, and charged towards the enormous creature like a cannonball. Get down on your knees! The boy gripped the sword hilt with both hands, treating the heavy iron sword like a simple club, and smashed it down furiously towards the saber-toothed tiger's head without any fancy moves. The air crackled with a deafening sonic boom. The boy's arm muscles bulged instantly, veins bulging like writhing dragons beneath his skin, unleashing the monstrous power contained within his 10-year-old body without reservation. Snap! With a chilling cracking sound, the saber-toothed tiger's massive body was slammed to the ground by this unreasonable, monstrous force. Its entire skull sank deep into the mud, twitched twice, and then completely lost its life. Phew, they really have thick skin. The boy casually slung the iron sword over his shoulder, breathing in the rainwater that mingled with the stench of blood, then burst into hearty laughter. Well, at least we have our extra meal for tonight. You little rascal, you've gotten stronger again. Just then, a sound like muffled thunder rang out in the downpour. A burly old man in a floral shirt appeared 10 paces away. He stared at the carcass of the beast on the ground, his eyes, hidden in the shadows, flashing with undisguised horror and complexity. Oh! Old man Garp, you're back quite early this time. The boy named Ace didn't turn around. He casually flicked the blood off his sword, grinned, and said, I heard your footsteps and that terrifying aura emanating from you from a kilometer away. Garp's eye twitched. Did you hear that? In this remote mountain area amidst thunder and rain, how can one detect footsteps and the slightest change in one's breath from a kilometer away? Observation hacky. Moreover, it's not a rudimentary skill developed through training, rather, it's more like an innate perceptual instinct, even faintly approaching the legendary hearing the voice of all things. Truly, a monster born to defy all logic. Garp muttered to himself, strode forward, raised his enormous fist, and instantly enveloped it in dark haki before slamming it down hard on Ace's head. Take this! A loving iron fist. Faced with a fist that could shatter even mountains, 10-year-old Ace did not dodge like an ordinary child. Instead, he raised his unsharpened iron sword and met Garp's fist head-on. Boom! A visible shockwave exploded between the grandfather and grandson, instantly draining away the surrounding rainwater. Snap! The iron sword shattered with a crack, and Ace flew backward like a kite with a broken string for more than 10 meters, crashing heavily into 3 large trees before coming to a stop. Ouch! 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 You old geezer, you're still so ruthless. What would have been a fatal blow to an ordinary person had instead left Ace unharmed as he climbed out of the rubble. He dusted himself off, and the horrible bruise on his chest was visibly fading away. Garp watched this scene and fell completely silent. Roger's son, whom he adopted from a young age, displayed a terrifying talent from birth. He started fighting wild beasts in the forest at the age of 3, seemingly never tiring. That inexhaustible energy was something even Roger never possessed back then. You brat, take your prey and get back to Dodden. Garp snorted, turned and strode into the rain, his back view filled with helplessness. Roger, what kind of monster did you leave behind? The rain is still falling. Ace glanced at the half-broken sword hilt in his hand, casually tossed it into the mud, and used one hand to support the heavy corpse of the saber-toothed tiger. He lowered his head and, in the last glimmer of lightning, looked at his freckled young face reflected in the puddle. Portgas D Ace. Ha! Ace muttered to himself, a wildly arrogant smile curving his lips. Garp had no idea what a mature and ambitious soul was hidden inside the body of this 10-year-old boy. He is not the original Fire Fist Ace who carried the shadow of his bloodline, yearned for recognition, and ultimately fell in the Marineford War. He is a time traveler. To be precise, his soul had already achieved the deepest level of fusion with this body while he was still in the womb. This transdimensional soul reshaping gave him 3 trump cards powerful enough to overturn the world. First, there is the innate visual perception that exists from the moment consciousness is restored, and the perceptual instinct that is almost like listening to the voice of all things. Secondly, it has monstrous energy and recovery speed. Unlike Charlotte Linlin, who was born with an inexhaustible supply of energy, he possessed seemingly limitless stamina. The hellish training regimen that Garp endured would have drained most people, but for him, a few breaths were all it took to get him back on his feet. The third point is the most terrifying part. Ace slowly raised his hands, feeling the 2 abysses within his body created by the doubling of his soul's strength. In this world, everyone can only possess 1 devil fruit. If someone forcibly eats a second one, their body will be torn apart by the combined power of 2 demons. But he was different. His soul was naturally large enough to bear the arrival of 2 demons. What about being the 2nd Division commander of the Whitebeard Pirates? What about the tragedy of being pierced through the chest by Akainu? Ace dragged his prey, facing the thunderstorm, and laughed loudly in the mountains and forests. There was no fear of fate in that laughter, only an untamed arrogance that trampled all rules underfoot. Since fate has given me a second chance at life and placed these trump cards in my hands, what I want to be is definitely not the son of one of the 4 emperors. Whether they are gods or celestial dragons, I will conquer this world with my own hands. Chapter 2. Outside the cabin of the bandit Dodden's family on Mount Kalbo. The rainstorm had just stopped, and the morning sunlight shone through the tree canopy onto the muddy ground. Bang! The heavy saber-toothed tiger carcass was carelessly thrown on the open ground in front of the wooden house, causing the whole house to shake 3 times. The door to the cabin was kicked open, and Dodden, a cigarette dangling from his lips, led a group of bandits who cautiously peeked out. When they saw the mountain-sized carcass of a ferocious beast, and the shirtless, black-haired boy standing beside it, they all gasped in horror. "Hey, Dodden, stop standing there! Deal with this big cat, we'll roast it for dinner tonight." Ace casually brushed his wet hair aside and spoke to Dodden and the others. He went into the forest last night and chased the saber-toothed tiger through the torrential rain for most of the night, finally dragging his prey back just before dawn. An ordinary 10-year-old would have given up long ago if he did that. But Ace's physique was different from ordinary people, it was as if there was a tireless furnace inside him. This kind of constitution, which doesn't require much sleep, is so rare that it's almost an anomaly, even in the vast ocean. Ace! You brat, you've gone and provoked a monster of this level again. Dodden roared angrily, but a hint of awe was hidden in her eyes. Ha ha ha! Oh well, ordinary wild boars aren't enough to warm me up anymore. Ace smiled and walked towards the water tank, preparing to wash off the bloodstains on his body, but suddenly stopped. His observation Haki detected a faint yet extremely tenacious life force within the wooden house, as well as a powerful aura that felt incredibly familiar to him. A burly figure emerged from the shadows of the wooden house. It was none other than Garp, the naval hero who had just beaten him up on the back hill. In Garp's hands, it was like carrying a chick. He was carrying a 7-year-old kid wearing a straw hat and with a scar below his left eye. Although the brat was being held in mid-air, his limbs were comically stretched out like rubber, and he was still shouting defiantly, "Let go of this old man! I'm going to be the Pirate King!" Ace looked at the kid in the straw hat, his pupils contracted slightly, and then the smile on his lips gradually widened. Luffy! We finally met! In the original work, 10-year-old Ace was extremely disgusted with his background and was full of hostility towards everyone, even spitting on Luffy when they first met. But the current Ace wouldn't. He possesses a mature soul and an ambition to devour the world. Moreover, he had a great fondness for Luffy in his previous life. In his eyes, this brat who will one day stir up the entire sea will be the most interesting witness on his path to the throne. Bang! Garp threw Luffy to the ground, pointed at Ace, and said, "Luffy, from today onwards you'll live here. That's Ace, 3 years older than you. From now on, you'll live with him." Before Garp could finish speaking, Ace had already strode up to Luffy. 10-year-old Ace, due to years of inhuman training, was already much taller than his peers. He looked down at Luffy, who was sitting on the ground, and the terrifying sense of oppression made Luffy subconsciously stop screaming and swallow nervously. What do you want to do?" Luffy pressed down hard on his straw hat. "One Piece?" Ace looked at Luffy, but instead of mocking him, he pinched Luffy's bouncy rubber cheeks and pulled them apart, then laughed, "Ha ha ha! Interesting. Although you're a frail rubber brat, your eyesight is quite good. Hey! Damn it! Listen up, kid!" Ace released his grip, pointed at himself with his thumb, and grinned. "From now on, if you want to follow me, then stick with me. You can have the title of Pirate King if you want. As for me, I will become the king of the world. The rules of this ocean will be rewritten by me sooner or later." Upon hearing this, Luffy was stunned, and even Garp, who was standing next to him, widened his eyes in disbelief as he stared at the imposing young man before him. Late that night, the Dodden family was all snoring, and Luffy, who had been exhausted all night by Ace's welcoming ceremony, also fell into a deep sleep in the corner with his mouth wide open. Ace was the only one who wasn't asleep. He only needs a short rest to fully recover his energy. His energy is unbelievable. Ace pushed open the window and nimbly leaped onto the roof. There, a blonde boy with a missing tooth, wearing a top hat and a blue vest, was already waiting for him. "Sabo, what brings you here in the middle of the night?" Ace walked over and casually sat down next to Sabo. "I came here to share information with you, you reckless fellow." Sabo, also 10 years old, sighed helplessly and pulled a crumpled wanted poster from his pocket. "Look, there's a rumor circulating in the East Blues black market that a devil fruit has been spotted. Hey, are you even listening?" "I'm listening." Ace rested his hands behind his head, looked up at the starry sky, and his eyes shone with a depth that only adults could understand. "Sabo, what would happen if someone ate 2 devil fruits?" Ace suddenly asked. Sabo paused for a moment, then answered as if reciting a memorized text, "Is that even a question? A person's body can only house one demon. If you greedily consume a second one, your body will explode. That's right, that's the limit for ordinary people. Ace sat up straight, turned to look at Sabo, and his smile appeared incredibly arrogant in the moonlight, because their souls only have one vessel. Sabo's heart skipped a beat. He looked into Ace's eyes, a crazy premonition washing over him. Ace, you wouldn't be thinking of. Sabo, let's become stronger together. Ace stood up, the wind whipping his black hair, and extended his hand to the future first mate. 7 years. We'll spend 7 years honing our physique and haki to their peak. When we set sail at 17, I will prove to the world. Whether they are the high and mighty nobles or the remnants of the old era in the new world, they are all merely stepping stones for my ascent to the throne. I will make this entire sea bow down beneath my feet. Looking into Ace's eyes, burning with a mad ambition, Sabo stared at him, feeling as if something had struck his chest hard. He knew that the boy before him was definitely not joking. Garp had tried to push Ace towards the navy more than once. But Ace knew very well that path wasn't for him. Above the navy's justice sat the world government. And above the world government sat a group of celestial dragons who called themselves gods. Given his personality, if he were to actually join that system, he would eventually tear down all those so-called rules and regulations. If that's the case, why take the long way around? In the end, the strong rule this world. He wanted to live freely and prevent anyone from bullying him, so he had to become stronger. He was so powerful that no one dared to judge him, so powerful that even the rules themselves had to be written by him. Chapter 3. Early morning, deep in the Kalpo Mountains. Ha ha ha. You big dummy bear, did you not eat yesterday? Try harder. Accompanied by laughter, an amazing scene was unfolding in the forest clearing. 10-year-old Ace, his muscular upper body bare, was engaged in a primal wrestling match with a 4-meter-long giant bear from Mount Kalbo. He used no knife, no techniques, simply gripping the bear's shoulders tightly with both hands, his legs carving deep furrows in the mud. With his superhuman strength and boundless energy, he forcefully subdued this tyrant of the forest. Roar! The giant bear let out a low, frustrated growl, clearly exhausted. Bang! Ace executed an over-the-shoulder throw, slamming the enormous beast hard onto the muddy ground. The giant bear was dazed and confused, its eyes rolling back, before it nuzzled against Ace's thigh in a conciliatory manner and lay down beside him like a wronged giant dog. Well done, I'll reward you with half a grilled fish later. Ace patted the giant bear's head and sat down casually on its soft belly. Ace! You're bullying the animals in the mountains again. The bushes nearby were pushed aside, and 10-year-old Sabo and 7-year-old Luffy came running up, panting. Each of them carried an extremely thick log on their shoulders, their bodies soaked in sweat, and they collapsed to the ground from exhaustion. Hey, what do you call bullying? This is called mutual sparring. Ace grinned and casually pointed around. At the edge of the clearing, several tigers, crocodiles, and gorillas with bruised and swollen faces were lying around. These ferocious beasts of the East Sea were now as docile as lambs in front of Ace. Come on, you clearly beat them into submission with your fists. Sabo muttered helplessly, then rubbed his sore shoulders. But seriously, those Marine headquarters training methods you got from Garp are absolutely deadly. That's right, Ace didn't go through any strange or unusual training. He knew very well that the most systematic and demanding basic training methods in the world were mostly in the hands of the Marine headquarters. From the age of 8, every time Garp returned to the East Blue, Ace would find all sorts of ways to trick him into revealing his secrets, managing to extract all of the Marine headquarters' grueling training methods, such as weighted cross-country running, waterfall pressure resistance, and deep-sea diving. This program, originally designed to train elite adult Marines, then became the daily routine for the three brothers. If I don't hone every muscle in my body to the extreme, how will I be able to roam freely on this sea in the future? Ace stood up, stretched his muscles, and a series of popping sounds came from his body. Luffy, have you rested enough? Go practice your resilience against that giant gorilla. Ace kicked Luffy towards the giant gorilla next to him, who was rubbing its fists together. Help, Ace! Luffy screamed as the gorilla tossed him into the air like a ball. Seeing Luffy's miserable state, Sabo swallowed hard and turned to Ace, and you? You finished your basic training last night, didn't you? A smile of excitement appeared on Ace's lips as he looked at the several huge wooden stakes standing upright in the center of the open space. Today, I'm going to try and break down the old man's steps. As soon as he finished speaking, Ace's figure suddenly blurred in place. Bang! A very faint sonic boom sounded beneath Ace's feet, and his body vanished instantly like an arrow released from a bow. The next second, he reappeared 10 meters away in front of the wooden stake. This is... Sabo's eyes widened in shock. The kind of teleportation that Garp used every time he beat you up. He stomped on the ground repeatedly in an instant, moving using the resulting reaction force. Ace grinned. The old man calls this thing shave, one of the 6 styles of the Navy. This was a muscle-generating technique that Ace had keenly observed after being beaten countless times by Garp, thanks to his innate observation haki that allowed him to hear everything. Since we're going to build a foundation under Garp's tutelage, we absolutely can't just learn the basics. He certainly wanted to learn all 6 techniques. In particular, the last one, known as Life Return, was something he had been eyeing for a long time. However, the 3 moves are still the most suitable for him right now. Shaving, to compensate for a sudden burst of energy. Moonwalk, allowing him to master aerial combat in advance. Paper drawing, on the other hand, allows him to fully utilize his observation haki. Bang! 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 Ace kept trying to exert his strength on the open ground. Although his movements were still a bit clumsy and the number of times he stomped the ground was far from the level of the commanders, his exaggerated physical talent had already allowed him to barely grasp the prototype of shave. What a complete monster! Sabo exclaimed, watching Ace leave after images across the field. He thought his talent was already quite good, but compared to Ace, it was like there was an invisible chasm between them. Stop dazed, Sabo. Come and exchange a few blows with me. Ace appeared in front of Sabo in a flash and threw a punch. Wow! UBD, you're serious? Sabo quickly raised the water pipe to block. Ha ha ha! If you can't even withstand my punches, how can you be my first mate? As the sun sets, the sounds of children playing and wild beasts echo through the Kalpo Mountains. That evening, the 3 brothers sat around the campfire in the camp, eating the grilled fish and game they had caught during the day, and talking about the future. Ace, Sabo took a bite of meat, then suddenly asked, I heard Garp say when he was drunk that the truly top-tier fighters on this sea all possess a power called haki. When do you plan to have him teach you that? Upon hearing the word domineering, even Luffy, who was busy grabbing meat nearby, perked up his ears curiously. Ace swallowed the food in his mouth, casually wiped the grease from the corner of his mouth with the back of his hand, and stared intently at the leaping flames. It's still early. Ace smiled, a glint of clarity flashing in his eyes. Haki, to put it simply, is the latent aura, fighting spirit and will of humanity. Even the strongest willpower needs a body to support it. Without a sufficiently monstrous physique as a foundation, forcibly cultivating armament haki will only drain your physical and mental strength. By then, let alone becoming stronger, they won't even be able to withstand a single decent, high-intensity battle. What we need to do now is treat this body like a sponge, absorbing nutrients like crazy, honing our muscles like crazy, pushing our physical limits to the very height of this mountain. Ace raised his greasy fist and shook it heavily in front of Sabo. When I turn 15, and my body is strong enough, I will personally pry open the old man's mouth and squeeze every last drop of his armament haki and martial arts essence out of him. Then, wait until you're 17. Ace stood up and said into the night breeze. Let's set sail and turn this boring world upside down. Chapter 4. Time flies, and the leaves on Mount Kalbo have turned yellow 3 times. 3 years later. On the edge of the Goa Kingdom, at the final scrap yard. This is the most filthy place in the entire country, with mountains of garbage and a pungent stench permeating the air. And at this moment, deep inside a dilapidated abandoned ship at the waste disposal terminal, a burst of arrogant, maniacal laughter is emanating from within. Ha ha ha! Kid, you're all limp with those sea stone handcuffs, aren't you? Let's see how you manage to cause trouble now. Bulgem, the great pirate of the East Blue with a bounty of 14.3 million berries, was holding a musket, the muzzle pressed firmly against the head of a 10-year-old boy wearing a straw hat. Behind him stood dozens of menacing pirate henchmen wielding knives and guns. Around them, a dozen or so pirates lay sprawled on the ground, their faces bruised and swollen. 10-year-old Luffy was bound to a pillar with thick iron chains, but his eyes still held the fierce look of a little wolf. After 3 years of Ace's inhumane training, Luffy was no longer the little brat who cried and screamed at the drop of a hat. If it weren't for Bulgem's ambush with his net gun and the sea stone handcuffs he somehow got his hands on, these bastards wouldn't have been able to catch him at all. Pa! Luffy spat out a mouthful of bloody saliva, his eyes showing no fear. You bunch of weaklings who can't even beat me? When Ace and Sabo arrive, I'll beat you all to a pulp. Ace? Sabo. Bulgem seemed to have heard the biggest joke in the world, and with a contemptuous look, he tapped Luffy's cheek with the barrel of his gun. Those 2 brats who've recently gained some notoriety in the underworld? I'm a great pirate heading to the Grand Line. If they dare to come, I'll take them all down with me. Boom! Before Bulgem could finish speaking, the heavy iron gate of the wrecked ship, as if struck head-on by a cannonball, shattered instantly with a deafening roar. The twisted iron, mixed with terrifying air currents, directly tore apart the 4 pirate henchmen standing at the gate, sending them flying like tattered sacks, coughing up blood. Smoke and dust billowed. 2 boys strolled in slowly, stepping on the broken sheet metal and wooden planks. The boy walking ahead no longer looked like a 13-year-old. He was nearly 1.8 meters tall, wearing only an open red vest, his bare shoulders, back, and arms muscular as if honed from years of fighting wild beasts. His slightly curly black hair was tousled by the wind, but his eyes were frighteningly arrogant. Beside him stood a blond boy in a blue tuxedo and top hat. He carried what appeared to be an ordinary iron pipe, but the end of the pipe had been worn smooth like a sharp blade. Yo, Luffy! Ace, hands in his pockets, looked at Luffy tied to the pillar and laughed loudly. You actually got caught by this piece of trash? Looks like you'll need to double your stress training tomorrow. Ace! Sabo! Luffy shouted excitedly, far from being afraid. Be careful, that guy in the pirate hat is strong. So it's you 2 arrogant brats. Bulgem's face instantly darkened as he looked at the destroyed gate. As a pirate from the East Blue with a bounty of 14.3 million berries, Bulgem hadn't survived this long because of his mercy. Shoot! Turn those 2 brats into a sieve. He swung his hand violently and roared hysterically. Dozens of muskets opened fire simultaneously, unleashing a dense barrage of lead bullets that instantly sealed off all escape routes at the main entrance. The pungent smell of gunpowder filled the abandoned ship's hold. Sabo, the left side is yours. Okay, Ace. Hurry up, I don't want my clothes stained with the blood of these scumbags. Just as the lead bullet was about to tear the 2 apart, a muffled sonic boom came from beneath Ace and Sabo's feet at the same time. Bang! The sturdy wooden floor shattered inch by inch, and the 2 figures, right before everyone's eyes, turned into 2 blurry afterimages and vanished from the spot in an instant. What? Where are they? The pirate henchman stared wide-eyed in horror. It's right behind you, you fools. Sabo chuckled, his figure flashing like a ghost as he cut into the crowd on the left. The iron pipe in his hand created a sharp gust of wind, and with a few crisp cracks, 5 or 6 musketeers had their jaws smashed and were sent flying backward before they could even scream. Meanwhile, Burgem's pupils suddenly contracted to the size of pinpoints. A dangerous gust of wind was aimed directly at his face. "Don't get too cocky, kid. I'm Bulgem, for crying out loud." Having earned a bounty of over 10 million berries in the East Blue, Bulgem was certainly no fool who only knew how to scare people. He suddenly drew his heavy, broad-backed cleaver, stained with dark red blood, from his waist. His muscular arms, veins bulging, slashed fiercely at the charging afterimage with a piercing shriek. This strike was so powerful that it could instantly cut even a fully grown elephant in half. However, faced with this deadly blade, Ace didn't even try to dodge. A hint of excitement flashed in his eyes. Paper drawing. Just as the blade was about to touch his chest, Ace's upper body suddenly slumped backward like a weightless piece of paper, propelled by the airflow created by the blade. The broad blade grazed almost the tip of his nose, severing a few strands of his slightly curly black hair. He dodged it. Bulgem was shocked, but his rich combat experience allowed him to react immediately. He didn't sheath his sword, instead, he flicked his wrist, changing the trajectory of the massive blade and slashing it down fiercely towards Ace, who was falling backward. Not bad, but this weak strength is far inferior to old man Garp. Ace laughed loudly. Without any haki, he relied solely on the monstrous strength he had honed over the past 3 years amidst waterfalls and giant beasts. He slammed his legs off the ground, his body instantly straightening like a wound-up spring, advancing instead of retreating. He aimed precisely at the angle of the blade's downward strike, clenched his right fist, avoided the sharpest point, and slammed it hard into the side of the broadsword. Flesh and blood clashed with a steel broadsword. Boom! The moment the fist collided with the back of the blade, a visible ring of air surged forth. The already rotten wooden planks inside the cabin collapsed under the enormous reaction force, and wood chips flew in all directions like projectiles. How is this possible? Burgem felt the terrifying recoil from the hilt of the knife, his hand instantly tore open, blood gushing out. He could hardly believe his eyes. A 13-year-old brat, with just one fist, had actually blocked his full force attack. What kind of monster is hiding inside this brat's body? Where are you looking, you ugly freak? Ace grinned slightly, and the power in his fist suddenly exploded. Bulgem felt an irresistible, immense force coming from the blade, and was forced to retreat 5 or 6 steps, each step leaving a deep footprint on the wooden plank. You brat, don't get too cocky. Chapter 5. Forced back by a mere 13-year-old brat, Bulgem's face darkened completely. Using the momentum of his retreat, he abruptly raised his left hand, the short-handled flintlock pistol he had been hiding in his sleeve aimed directly at Ace's head. Die! Bang! Flames spewed out, and the two were less than 3 meters apart. For ordinary people, this is almost an unavoidable distance. Luffy, leaning against the pillar, closed his eyes in terror. Ace. However, Ace's smile did not fade in the slightest. Bang! Another strange, muffled sound echoed through the air. Ace didn't dodge to the left or right, but instead slammed his right foot into the void. In that instant, the air seemed to transform into tangible steps. Navy Type 6 Moonwalk. Just as the bullet left the barrel, Ace's body was suddenly propelled 3 meters higher, and the deadly lead bullet flew past his feet, shattering the wooden pillar behind him. Stepped into the sky. Bulgem looked up in despair at the black-haired boy who was suspended in mid-air, his mind completely blank. How could a monster in a backwater like the East Sea possess such legendary martial arts? Warm-up complete. He flipped in mid-air, his right leg arching back, his whole body like a taut bow. The next instant, his leg tore through the air, slashing down from above. Burgem could only instinctively raise his broadsword above his head in an attempt to block. Click! A sickening metallic crack echoed through the cabin. The heavy great sword that had slain countless people shattered in the middle under Ace's pure, physical kick. Ace's heel, still powerful, slammed into Buljem's shoulder with devastating force. Boom! The entire abandoned ship's hold shook violently, the immense impact smashing Buljem, bones and all, through the decaying floor. Wood chips and mud shot into the air, and Buljem coughed up a mouthful of blood, slamming into the mud below, half his body sinking in. Countless bones were broken, and he was completely unconscious. The remaining 20 or 30 pirate henchmen, staring at the lifeless Buljem in the pit, were utterly terrified. Monsters! These two brats are monsters! One of the henchmen screamed in terror, suddenly drawing a short sword from his waist, turning abruptly to press it against Luffy's neck, and shouting desperately, "No! Don't come any closer! If you come any closer, I'll kill this brat in the straw hat!" Ace, who was about to continue his attack, stopped in his tracks upon hearing this. He didn't rush over immediately, but simply looked at the pirate who was holding Luffy hostage. That look was so calm that the pirate's hand gripping his sword trembled first. "Kill him?" Ace asked, his voice low. "You can give it a try. That is, your hands still obey you." As soon as he finished speaking, an invisible aura emanated from Ace's body and crashed down. All sounds in the wrecked ship seemed to be instantly cut off, and the air became so heavy that it was hard to breathe. The pirate's vision went black, and the short sword in his hand clattered to the ground. Immediately afterward, one by one, the surrounding pirates rolled their eyes and collapsed. In a mere second, only Ace, Sabo, and Luffy, who was tied to a pillar and staring in disbelief, remained standing in the cabin. Conqueror's Haki. There was no despair on the brink of life and death, nor any sudden enlightenment after painful struggle. Over the past 3 years, Ace's ambition, will, and spirit had been ingrained deep within him through countless training sessions and battles. Until this moment, someone crossed his bottom line using the most despicable means. Then that power erupted. What just happened? Sabo looked at the pirates lying unconscious on the ground, his fingers gripping the hose tightening involuntarily. Just a moment ago, even he felt a weight lift from his chest. "It's nothing, just cleaning up some annoying trash." Ace withdrew his oppressive aura, his icy expression instantly melting away, and a smile returned. He stepped forward, glanced down at the thick iron chains binding Luffy, and felt the unique, cold touch of the sea stone. Sea stone. Ace squeezed the handcuffs, feeling the cold, oppressive sensation emanating from them. A pirate from the East Blue actually managed to get his hands on something like this. Ace observed for a moment, then turned and walked to Buljem, who was lying unconscious at the bottom of the pit. Without any hesitation, he kicked the great pirate from the East Blue over, roughly tore open his clothes, and pulled out a bunch of blood-stained copper keys from his pocket. He walked up to Luffy and inserted the key into the lock. With a crisp click, the heavy sea stone handcuffs and chains slid off and crashed onto the wooden floor. "Wow! I'm alive again!" As soon as Luffy was freed, he jumped up on the spot, his rubber arms swinging wildly. "Ace! That glare you just did was so cool! Teach me, teach me! Ha ha ha! This can't be taught, it's innate kingly talent!" Ace laughed, reaching out to pull Luffy's straw hat down a bit, then turning to look at the ruins. "Sabo, stop standing there, get to work!" Ace kicked aside a few pieces of broken planks and dragged several heavy iron boxes out from under the rubble. With a loud bang, the box lid was flung open, and a dazzling golden light instantly shimmered inside. It was filled with gold and treasure plundered by the Buljem pirates from the East Blue over the years. A double cross. Sabo walked over, his eyes lighting up as he looked at the treasure, worth tens of millions of berries. This is called returning something to its rightful owner. Ace hoisted the heaviest gold coin box onto his shoulder, weighed it in his hand, and laughed. "The rule on this sea is, winner takes all. With this money, Sabo, we've almost raised enough startup capital to build our pirate ship. Sabo looked at the chests of treasure, pulled down his hat brim, and smiled. It seems we have a ship. Chapter 6. The backyard of the Dodden family's log cabin on Mount Corpo. The moon was bright and the stars were few. The dry firewood crackled and popped in the campfire, illuminating the backyard. A huge roasted wild boar sat on the fire, emitting an enticing aroma of fat. Ugh! This is so delicious. I'm starving. Luffy crossed his legs on the ground, his two rubber arms blurring through the air as he frantically stuffed grilled meat into his mouth, his cheeks puffed out like two balloons. Even with several bandages on his face, it didn't slow him down at all. On the other side of the campfire, Sabo sat cross-legged amidst a pile of glittering gold treasures, using the firelight as his eyes darted around. He held a small notebook, and his quill pen flew across the paper as he made calculations. So, Ace, shirtless and tossing a gold coin aside, looked at Luffy, whose mouth was greasy, and asked, "Even though you're usually a bit simple-minded, these 3 years of training haven't been wasted. How exactly did that clumsy guy, Bulgem, manage to catch you?" Upon hearing Ace's question, Luffy swallowed the meat in his mouth with difficulty, gulped down a mouthful of water, and then angrily swung his fist. "It wasn't a direct confrontation I lost. This morning I was catching rhinoceros beetles at the edge of the junkyard when those guys suddenly rushed out and surrounded me." Luffy shouted indignantly, "They said you and Sabo have been robbing them of business several times in the underworld lately, and they're trying to force me to tell them where our base and treasure are hidden on Mount Kalbo." Of course, I didn't say anything, and then they suddenly threw out a strange net with stones attached. The moment I touched that net, all my strength vanished. Upon hearing Luffy's explanation, Ace paused slightly in his hand, which was tossing gold coins. Sabo, standing nearby, also stopped writing, looking at Luffy with a complicated expression. Faced with the brutal torture of a pirate worth millions, even many adult pirates would be terrified and wet their pants, revealing everything. But this 10-year-old brat gritted his teeth and endured it, not uttering a single word. "You idiot!" Sabo sighed helplessly, but a barely concealed amusement lured into his eyes. Even a simple lie could have lured them to the territory of that mutated giant bear in the back mountains. Why insist on fighting to the death? But I don't want to lie to those trash. And I would never betray Ace and Sabo. Luffy shouted righteously, then lowered his head and continued to eat the roasted leg in his hand. Ha ha ha! Ace stepped forward, grabbed Luffy's head, and vigorously ruffled his hair. "Well done, Luffy! A true man of the sea would never betray his brothers, even in death." Ace ruffled Luffy's hair, his tone still nonchalant, but the protectiveness in his voice was obvious. "But next time something like this happens, be smarter. Run if you can, and come back and tell me. I'll go twist their skulls off." "Hee hee, I know." Luffy grinned carefree. Ace withdrew his hand, turned and walked to the pile of spoils, pulling a weapon stuck in the mud with a backhand motion. It was an incredibly heavy single-edged broadsword. The blade was white and had a cold, dark blue color, with the hilt wrapped in non-slip black animal hide. This was something Ace found in the private treasure chest of that multi-million-dollar pirate when they destroyed Bulgem's lair. Because it was so heavy, Bulgem couldn't use it normally, so it just happened to be a good deal for Ace. "The weight is passable, enough for me to wield for a few years." Ace casually swung the knife twice, the heavy blade easily tearing through the air with a piercing sonic boom. For him now, swordsmanship was secondary. Combined with his monstrous strength, this heavy cleaver was perfect for using as a blunt weapon to smash people. "Sabo, how's the inventory going?" Ace slung his machete over his shoulder and looked at the chief treasurer beside him. Sabo closed the ledger, his blue eyes gleaming with excitement. He lowered his voice and said, "We're rich, Ace. That BD Bulgem has amassed such a fortune by robbing merchant ships these past few years. All the gold, jewels, and cash are worth approximately 80 million berries. 80 million. Ace raised an eyebrow. That should be enough to build a good ship in the East Blue. 80 million to build a ship. Sabo was somewhat surprised. That amount of money, if we went to a famous shipyard like the one in Sirab village, should be enough to hire the best craftsmen to build a top-of-the-line two-masted sailing ship. Should we go to other islands to look for people? Ace shook his head. There's no need to go that far. No matter how top-notch the timber and shipbuilding technology in the East Blue Sea are, they're just a few slightly sturdier planks in the face of the extreme climate of the Grand Line. We still have 4 years before we set sail. Ace drew several lines on the muddy ground with his machete. The weather, currents, and sea monsters of the Grand Line are not things that ordinary wooden ships can easily withstand. Therefore, the first ship doesn't need to be perfect. Fast enough, tough enough, enough to carry us over Reverse Mountain and into the Grand Line, that's enough. Upon hearing Ace's plan, Sabo immediately understood. You mean this ship, which cost 80 million to build, is merely our initial transitional ship? That's right. Ace raised his head, his dark eyes piercing through the thick smoke of the campfire, as if looking into the distant and mysterious clouds. How could a ship truly be worthy of us, worthy of serving as our vehicle for ruling the world, possibly be an ordinary wooden boat? Ace grinned, his smile revealing an ambition to conquer the world. Once we enter the Grand Line, I'll personally lead you up to the Cloud Realm. There you'll find gold, materials that Qinghai doesn't have, and completely different technology. Then we'll go there and get a flagship worthy of the Eclipse. Sabo gasped, his hand holding the ledger trembling slightly. Clouds, Ace, you mean the legendary Sky Island? That place that only exists in fairy tales and picture books, does it really exist? Of course it exists, and it will soon be our airspace. Ace laughed as he stood up and casually stuck the large machete into the soil beside him. Ace. Just then, Sabo seemed to suddenly remember something, glanced at the ledger in his hand, and then turned to look at Luffy, who was still engrossed in eating meat. Luffy will set sail 3 years later than us. Now that we have plenty of funds, should we ask that shipwright to put in a little more effort and build Luffy a single-masted sailing ship ahead of time? As the older brother, Sabo was still a bit of a worrywart at heart. Hearing this, Luffy finally stopped eating. He swallowed the food in his mouth, wiped the grease from the corner of his mouth haphazardly, and sprang up from the ground like a spring. I don't want to. Luffy crossed his arms in front of his chest, making a big X, and loudly refused without hesitation. Hey? Why? Sabo was taken aback. With a good ship, wouldn't you be much safer when you go out to sea? I don't want a ship you've already built. Luffy pressed down on his straw hat, his voice suddenly rising. What's the point of a pirate adventure if even the ship you set sail on is prepared by someone else? Listen up. When I set sail, I'm going to start from scratch all by myself. I'm going to find 10 incredibly powerful and fun-loving companions on my own. Then, together with them, we'll build a pirate ship 100 times cooler than yours. I'm going to be the pirate king, I don't need your help. Looking at Luffy's energetic, even somewhat stubborn, single-minded appearance, the air around the campfire fell silent for a moment. Immediately afterwards, ha 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 ha! Ace burst into laughter. As he laughed, he slapped Luffy's shoulders so hard that he almost shoved Luffy into the mud. Well said. That's a real man's adventure. Ace looked at him and laughed even louder. Although his younger brother was an idiot, his desire for freedom was no less than anyone else's on this sea. However, while he praised her, the eldest brother's sarcasm was also indispensable. After laughing enough, Ace added insult to injury, but Sabo, you're definitely overthinking it. With this kid's brain, which can't even tell east from west, even if you gave him a big ship, he couldn't sail it without a navigator. He might even run aground and sink on his very first day at sea. Ace. Don't look down on me. Luffy was so angry he jumped up and down. I think, Ace chuckled, stroking his chin, barely suppressing a laugh, by the time you turn 17 and set sail, you probably won't even have enough money to buy a small wooden boat. You might just end up crawling into any old apple barrel and drifting aimlessly on the sea. I'm not going to crawl into a barrel. I'll have a supersized ship. Just you wait and see. Luffy defiantly bared his teeth and claws at Ace. Sabo shook his head helplessly and carefully put the ledger away. The campfire crackled. Watching Ace and Luffy frolicking around, he suddenly thought, this isn't so bad. Chapter 7. On the outskirts of the Goa Kingdom, in a secluded shipbuilding workshop. Bang! A heavy leather trunk was placed on a wooden table covered in wood shavings. The trunk was opened, and the enormous sum of 80 million berries gleamed brilliantly in the dimly lit workshop. 13-year-old Sabo adjusted his top hat and calmly looked at the stunned, retired shipwright opposite him. 80 million berries. The old shipwright swallowed hard, his hand holding the pipe trembling slightly. Young man, that's enough to build a luxurious three-masted galleon comparable to a naval warship. What exactly do you want to build? We don't need a large ship. Sabo took a blueprint from his pocket, placed it on the table, and said methodically, a small to medium-sized stern or two-masted sailboat that can accommodate a dozen or so people will suffice. But our captain has 3 requirements. First, the frame and keel must be made of the finest timber available in the East Blue Sea, striving for absolute sturdiness to withstand the extreme currents of the Grand Line. Secondly, the ship's streamlined design must push speed to the extreme, it must be one of the fastest ships on this vast ocean. Third, and most importantly, the living facilities on board the kitchen, bedrooms, and even the deck areas must be sufficiently comfortable and luxurious. We want top-notch enjoyment, not to suffer at sea. After hearing these 3 requirements, the old shipwright gasped. Using the budget for building a large warship to demolish a small to medium-sized sailboat meant that every part of the ship, every inch of the deck, could be handcrafted to perfection. This kind of meticulous work, regardless of cost, is a dream order for shipwrights. The old shipwright stroked the blueprints, his eyes gleaming with fervor. But it requires an extremely long time to select the timber and polish the interior, at least 3 years. It's all right. Sabo took half a suitcase out and pushed it over. This is the deposit. The rest will be settled when the ship is launched. Time slips away silently, like sand through fingers. Through the changing seasons, the leaves on Mount Kalbo have turned yellow twice. 2 years later. Deep in the Kalpo Mountains, a dull thud shattered the morning's tranquility. Boom! A massive mutated crocodile was struck in the jaw with a clean, swift side kick. Without any further movement, the crocodile's enormous body tumbled through the air before crashing heavily onto the muddy ground, instantly losing consciousness. Sunlight filtered through the treetops, illuminating the black-haired boy standing with his legs drawn up. 15-year-old Ace had already grown to approximately 2.2 meters tall. 2 years of intense training had worn away any trace of his youthful immaturity. His shoulders and back were broad, his muscles not exaggerated, but firm and muscular, like those of a predator ready to pounce on its prey. This was the strength he had developed through long periods of fighting, carrying heavy loads, enduring beatings, and recovering. He no longer laughs and provokes others as he did when he was a child. He pulled his legs back, steadied himself, and calmed his breathing. These few simple movements were enough to quiet down the previously restless wild beasts nearby. Ace's kicking technique is getting crisper and crisper. Luffy, sitting on a tree branch not far away, was biting into a piece of apple, looking at the fallen giant crocodile with amazement in his eyes. Just then, Ace suddenly stopped moving. His keen observation haki detected a familiar yet oppressive aura. You two brats! I've only been gone for half a year, and you've been wasting your time in the forest again. Accompanied by a gust of wind, Garp, wearing a floral shirt and a navy justice coat, landed heavily on a boulder a dozen meters away. He clenched his fist, which was as big as a casserole dish, and his knuckles cracked loudly. "Grandpa's here!" Luffy jumped in fright and almost fell off the tree. Ace didn't speak. He slowly turned around and casually stuck the broadsword he was carrying on his shoulder into the ground. Watching Garp leap down from the boulder, swinging his fists and charging straight at him, Ace's attention completely focused. "Let me see if you've been slacking off these past 6 months." A loving iron fist. Garp sneered, his massive body appearing before Ace as if by teleportation. Dark armament haki instantly enveloped his right fist, unleashing a sonic boom that tore through the air, and slammed down mercilessly. In the past, when faced with this punch, Ace could only rely on his pure physical strength to take it head-on, and would be sent flying without any suspense. But today, Ace lowered his legs slightly, leaving 2 deep footprints in the soil beneath his feet. He didn't retreat, nor did he draw his sword, instead, he clenched his right fist tightly. "I've seen through your power generation method thoroughly in the past 5 years, Ace muttered to himself, his muscles tensing to their limit. He met Garp's iron fist head-on, swinging his right arm with a brutal, unadorned motion. In that instant, Ace forcefully mobilized the strength and will he had honed through 5 years of rigorous training. Buzz! In Garp's suddenly contracted pupils, he clearly saw that on Ace's bronze arm, a layer of dark, yet genuine iron-black luster had appeared. Armament haki hardening. Boom! 2 fists, one large and one small, entwined in black, collided violently in mid-air. In an instant, a terrifying shockwave, visible to the naked eye, exploded outwards from the two. Grass and shrubs within a 30-meter radius were uprooted, and the blast wave forced Luffy, who was far away, to close his eyes. Snap! The ground beneath Ace's feet shattered inch by inch. Even with the boost of haki, faced with the absolute difference in strength, he was still forced back 7 or 8 meters by Garp's monstrous strength, plowing 2 deep furrows in the mud. But he wasn't thrown off his feet, instead, he remained standing firmly. The gust of wind subsided, and the dust settled. Ace slowly withdrew his slightly numb right arm, the faint layer of iron black on his fist gradually fading. He raised his head, his gaze calmly meeting Garp's, who remained in a punching stance. The entire forest fell into a deathly silence. Garp looked at his fist, then at the steady-looking black-haired boy opposite him. For the first time ever, a hint of disbelief flashed in the eyes of this battle-hardened vice-admiral. He had never properly taught Ace haki. But relying on his observations from being beaten up over the past 5 years, muscle memory and that monstrous body, the kid actually managed to push the door open by himself. "Old man!" Ace brushed the dust off his arms, breaking the silence. His tone was devoid of any boastfulness, only a matter-of-fact calm. "The self-taught methods I developed are too physically demanding." Ace looked directly into Garp's eyes, his voice steady and resolute. "My foundation built over these past 5 years is solid enough, and my body is strong enough to withstand the strain of haki. Now, teach me the truly systematic armament haki, and your physical techniques." Upon hearing Ace's perfectly justified demand, the initial shock on Garp's face slowly subsided, replaced by an indescribable complexity. After a long while, Garp slowly withdrew his fist and gave Ace a deep look. "Good lad, now that you've opened this door yourself." Garp ripped off his navy coat and tossed it aside. His bones crackled like popping beans, and a terrifying pressure far exceeding what he had felt before erupted from his body. "Then prepare yourself mentally. Next, I will infuse your body with true domineering aura and physical skills, down to your very marrow." Ace didn't back down. He clenched his fist again, and the mud beneath his feet sank in once more. 2 years remain before setting sail. The true transformation of this monster begins from this moment. Chapter 8. In the year 1536 of the sea calendar, on the coast of Windmill Village, the morning sea breeze carried a salty, damp scent, and the waves crashed against the rocks. 14-year-old Luffy stood on the edge of the cliff, looking up at them, his fists clenched tightly. Standing before him were two imposing figures, as imposing as iron towers. After 2 years of honing his domineering presence and physical skills, 17-year-old Ace had grown to about 2.5 meters tall. He wore an open, dark red sleeveless trench coat, his shoulders and back were broad, his arms were taut, and his whole person looked like he had been forged through countless battles and training sessions. He simply stood there, and the surrounding villagers instinctively lowered their voices. Sabo stood beside him, also over 2.4 meters tall. His dark blue tailored suit was impeccably tailored, giving him an air of aristocratic composure. The water pipe in his hand had long been replaced by a custom-made long pole infused with high-strength alloy. "We're leaving, Luffy." Ace lowered his head, looked at Luffy, and said in a steady tone. "I know. I will definitely come to the high seas to find you 3 years from now." Luffy clenched his fist and shouted loudly. Ace didn't say anything more, he just reached out and patted Luffy's straw hat. "See you on the high seas." Sabo chuckled and patted Luffy on the shoulder. "We're leaving, Luffy, but don't let your guard down." After saying their goodbyes, the two turned and walked away. Without any lingering farewells, under the awe-inspiring gazes of the villagers of Windmill Village, Ace and Sabo boarded a makeshift wooden boat moored on the shore and rowed towards the distant horizon. Half a day later, in a secluded shipbuilding workshop in the East Blue Sea. As Ace and Sabo stepped into the enormous cave, the old shipwright, who had been sitting in a rocking chair smoking, suddenly trembled with fear. The old shipwright looked up at the much taller, black-haired youth before him, nearly dropping his pipe from his fingers. The brat who delivered money 4 years ago was actually working for such a monster? "Is the ship finished?" Ace asked calmly, his deep voice echoing in the empty cave. "Of course. My most perfect creation in my life has long been prepared for you." The old shipwright seemed to wake from a dream, hurriedly stood up, and forcefully pulled down a giant canvas that was covering the huge dock behind him. With the rumble of turning chains, a top-class sailing ship, a true work of art, was fully revealed before Ace and Sabo. Unlike traditional naval warships, it lacked bulk and instead featured a sleek, sharp teardrop shape. Approximately 35 meters long, it had 2 decks and a twin-mast design. For the keel and load-bearing structure of the entire ship, I used the highest density iron pine available on the black market, wrapped in a layer of specially treated anti-corrosion steel plates. Not only is it sturdy enough to rampage through reefs, but its streamlined hull also minimizes wind and water resistance. Given the right wind direction, its speed will absolutely be the fastest in the East Blue Sea. The old shipwright described the scene with great enthusiasm. Sabo pushed open the living room door, glanced around, and then whistled softly. The interior design perfectly matched their desire for enjoyment. There was a temperature-controlled wine cellar, a spacious hall with soft silk carpets, comfortable leather sofas, and even the bathtub in the bathroom was crafted from a single piece of precious stone. This wasn't a dilapidated wooden ship destined for a life of hardship at sea, but a mobile palace perfect for comfortable living. "Well done." Ace walked onto the deck, the planks beneath his feet not moving an inch. He reached out and tapped the gunwale, listening to the dull, solid echo, and chuckled. 80 million berries, well spent. Raise the sails, weigh anchor. Ace walked to the bow and gave his first order since setting sail. "Understood, Ace." Sabo steered the ship, and the huge, pure white mainsail billowed instantly in the sea breeze. This medium-sized fast ship, costing 80 million berries, ripped through the calm surface of the East Blue Sea like a sword released from a bow, silently gliding into the vast ocean. Splash! The sturdy, sharp wave-cutting head cuts through the surging waves, yet the hull remains remarkably stable. Huge, pure black sails billow in the sea breeze, propelling this streamlined, elegant sailboat across the water at an astonishing speed that ordinary merchant ships can only dream of. From today onwards, you will be called Eclipse. Ace stood on the wide bow deck, his hands casually resting on the wooden handrails. It's a perfect ship. Not only is it ridiculously fast, but its chassis is also so stable that there isn't even the slightest unnecessary sway. Sabo stepped out of the cockpit, carrying 2 bottles of chilled juice that he had just taken from the temperature-controlled wine cellar, and handed one of them to Ace. With a cost of 80 million berries, if they can't even achieve this level of stability, that old shipwright should be thrown into the sea to feed the sharks. Ace took the bottle, tilted his head back, and drank it all in one gulp. During their few days at sea, Ace and Sabo simply sailed the Eclipse aimlessly through the East Blue Sea. This served 2 purposes: firstly, to familiarize themselves with the new ship's capabilities, and secondly, to give Ace a brief respite from over a decade of monotony. Ace, where do we go next? Sabo unfolded an extremely detailed East Blue Sea chart, his long, slender fingers pointing across it. Judging by the current wind direction, if we head south, we'll reach the bustling town of Orange in 3 days, if we head east, we'll be in the jurisdiction of the 153rd Marine Division. Ace didn't answer immediately. He closed his eyes slightly, letting the sea breeze, carrying moisture, caress his face. In this quiet afternoon, Ace unleashed his observation haki. That innate sense, carried by the sea breeze, the sound of the waves, and the vibrations of the ship, spread in all directions. The flapping of seagulls as they swept through the clouds, the murmur of deep-sea fish swimming in the undercurrents, even the screams of 2 pirate ships locked in combat thousands of meters away, the sounds of everything in the world gathered in Ace's mind like fine threads. Suddenly, he heard a faint call. Ace opened his eyes, his gaze falling on the southwest direction, which was not marked on the sea chart. Sabo, turn the ship around and turn full speed southwest. Ace's voice carried an undeniable decisiveness. Southwest. Sabo paused, his gaze sweeping across the nautical chart, his brow furrowing slightly. Ace, the chart for the southwest is blank. According to rumors among East Sea merchants, that area has extremely turbulent currents, is perpetually shrouded in dense fog, and is known as a desolate land even birds cannot cross. Many ships that have strayed there have mysteriously disappeared. Jedi. Ace turned around and placed the cup on the round table beside him. Then let's go see if this so-called dead end can really stop our Eclipse Pirates. Chapter 9. 1 day later. As the merchants of the East Blue Sea had recounted, when the Eclipse had completely sailed into the southwestern waters, the sky suddenly darkened. The sunlight was blocked by a thick, grayish-white fog, and the breeze on the sea disappeared. Instead, there were surging undercurrents from the depths of the sea, as if some enormous creatures were fighting underwater. Bang! Bang! Undercurrents, powerful enough to tear ordinary merchant ships apart, slammed violently against the Eclipse's hull, producing a dull, teeth-grinding thud. But the Eclipse did not fall apart. The iron pine keel, encased in anti-corrosion steel plates, withstood the impacts time and again. Although the hull rose and fell in the undercurrents, it never deviated from its course. The teardrop-shaped, sharp hull, like a black scalpel, precisely sliced through deadly whirlpools under Sabo's steady helm. What terrifying currents! No wonder this place is called the Jedi. Sabo glanced at the churning black sea water outside the window, but there was little panic in his voice. If it were the ordinary sailboat we originally planned to build 4 years ago, it would probably have fallen apart by now. Ace stood at the very front of the deck, and even as the ship bobbed and swayed in the undercurrent, his feet seemed to be firmly planted on the deck, and his body didn't sway at all. We're almost there. Ace looked ahead. Deep within the dense fog, the call that had been faintly heard since entering the sea area was becoming increasingly clear. As his words fell, the thick fog ahead suddenly parted, revealing the silhouette of a vast, desolate island, exuding an aura of death. Along the island's coastline, numerous wrecked ship planks lay scattered haphazardly. White skeletons, some marine life, others human, lay half buried in the rough sand. Inside the island, there are endless rows of black, strange rocks and dense, primeval jungles that almost block out the sunlight. There is no trace of human life here, only a wild and desolate landscape forgotten by the world. Drop anchor. Ace's voice rang out on the deck, calm and brief. The Eclipse's heavy steel anchor crashed into the sea, embedding itself firmly in the seabed rock. Ace gripped the ship's side with one hand and leaped off the deck, which was more than 10 meters high. Bang! A muffled thud. Ace landed steadily on the mudflats. His astonishing weight, combined with the force of his fall, left 2 half-meter-deep dents in the hard, wet sand beneath his feet. Sabo followed closely behind, landing lightly beside him, gripping the specially made alloy staff tightly in his hand. Something's not right here. Sabo looked around, his gaze sweeping over the weathered skeletons. There are no names on the nautical charts. Let's go. Ace ignored the bones on the ground. He slightly raised his head and, following the direction of the call in his mind, walked directly towards the primeval jungle that seemed to devour light. The jungle was humid and sweltering, with enormous ferns and tangled vines blocking almost all the paths. But these things can't stop them. Without Ace needing to lift a finger, Sabo used his alloy staff to poke, sweep, and smash, carving a path through the vines. Roar! Just as the two had ventured about 2 kilometers into the jungle, a deafening roar suddenly exploded overhead. A foul stench swept over them, and the dense canopy overhead was violently smashed open. An ancient beast, over 10 meters long, covered in hard black scales, resembling a saber-toothed tiger but with 3 tails, opened its blood-red maw and lunged at Ace, who was walking ahead. This is the apex predator on this nameless, deserted island. Its sharp fangs are enough to easily crush steel. Watch out, Ace! Sabo frowned, just about to swing his club. But Ace didn't even look up. He maintained his original pace until the very moment the beast pounced in front of him, at which point he raised his right hand, fingers spread wide. Bang! A dull thud echoed through the forest. Ace's large, thick hand firmly pressed down on the beast's charging head, instantly halting its massive momentum. The 10-meter-long ancient beast was actually stopped in midair by him with a single hand. The beast's vertical pupils suddenly contracted, and it struggled to retreat. But the hand pressing down on its head felt like a mountain, rendering it unable to move. Quiet down! Ace said calmly, his wrist suddenly pressing down. Boom! The earth trembled violently. The scaly beast, weighing several tons, was pressed into the soil beneath Ace's feet with a single hand. The hard skull emitted a teeth-grinding cracking sound, and before the beast could even let out a scream, it completely lost its life, and crimson blood spread along the soil. Instant kill. Ace withdrew his hand, his breathing rhythm unchanged, as if he had casually swatted away an annoying mosquito. Looks like the food on this island is pretty good. Ace stepped over the monster's corpse and continued forward. Sabo looked at the dead ancient overlord on the ground and shook his head helplessly. At 17, Ace's physique had been honed to a level that even he found unfathomable. The two continued forward. The deeper they went into the island, the sparser the surrounding vegetation became. In their place were steep, black rock walls. Finally, guided by their observation haki, the two stopped at the deepest part of a huge natural cave hidden behind a waterfall. The cave was damp and cold, with a faint scent of moss in the air. At the end, there was a black rock cliff face covered with crisscrossing cracks. Ace, look there! Sabo's gaze was drawn to a crevice in the rock at the bottom of the cliff. Hidden in that low, secluded crevice, lay a strangely shaped fruit. Its entire body was a bright orange-red, its skin covered with spiraling, flame-like patterns. Just looking at it, one could almost feel its scorching heat. A devil fruit just hidden in a crevice like that. Sabo, usually so composed, now sounded surprised. On the high seas, devil fruits are incredibly rare treasures. Even the most renowned pirates of the East Blue might never have seen a real devil fruit in their entire lives. Ace walked to the cliff face and glanced down at the orange-red fruit. He didn't reach out immediately, because the calling didn't come from the fruit. His sense of listening to all things was still pulling at his nerves, pointing them higher up the cliff. Ace slowly raised his head. About 6 meters above the ground, there was another deep and narrow slit. Because of the dim lighting and the striking orange-red fruit at the bottom, even an ordinary person would be instantly distracted and wouldn't notice anything hidden above their head. Ace leaped forward, his large hand reaching unhesitatingly into the dark crevice. When he withdrew his hand, a crimson gold fruit appeared in his palm. The fruit was shaped like a beating heart. The spiral patterns on its skin intertwined, faintly outlining an ancient totem resembling a divine bird spreading its wings. One tall, one short, twin demons. Ace looked at the crimson gold fruit in his hand, feeling the frenzied resonance it generated with his blood. At this moment, he no longer hesitated. What heaven bestows, one should take. Now that the sea has presented him with such a divine gift, as a king determined to reach the top, he has no reason to refuse the sea's bounty. Ace lowered his head, casually picked up the orange-red flame fruit from the crevice in the rocks below, and tossed it to Sabo behind him. Sabo caught it instinctively, then paused for a moment. Ace, what's this? Nature type, flame fruit. Ace's voice echoed through the cave. Eat it, and you will become the flame of the eclipse. After saying that, Ace looked again at the crimson gold fruit in his palm. In that instant, he seemed to hear the cry of a divine bird that pierced through eternity. Ace didn't say another word. He opened his mouth and, without hesitation, took a bite of the golden red fruit. Chapter 10. Deep inside the dark, damp cave, the sounds of 2 bites crushing fruit flesh rang out almost simultaneously. This taste. Ace frowned. The moment the piece of crimson gold fruit burst open in his mouth, a mixture of rottenness, stench, and bitterness mingled together, like chewing on a piece of sea king's entrails that had been rotting for months. An ordinary person would probably have vomited on the spot. Ace, however, only paused for a moment, his Adam's apple bobbing, before forcing the mouthful of fruit down his throat. On the other side, Sabo also swallowed the orange-red fruit. He covered his mouth and coughed violently twice, about to complain about the inhuman taste, when his body suddenly stiffened. Ace, my body! Sabo lowered his head. His right hand, which held the alloy staff, had somehow lost its flesh and blood form. His skin, muscles, and even bones had all transformed into bright, blazing orange-red flames in an instant. Boom! Without any deliberate guidance, a surge of frenzied flames erupted from Sabo's body, instantly engulfing him. The intense heat dispelled the years of cold and dampness accumulated within the cave, illuminating the surrounding dark rocks. Is this the power of the Logia type? Sabo looked at his arm, which had turned into flames, and tentatively threw a punch forward. A pillar of fire roared out, melting a stalactite pillar more than 10 meters away. There was no pain of burns. Only a wonderful, transparent feeling, as if one had transformed into an element of nature. Just as Sabo was feeling the power of the flame fruit, the air behind him suddenly seemed to sink. Thump, thump. A dull, rhythmic heartbeat emanated from Ace's body, like an ancient war drum resounding deep within the cave. Ace lowered his head, his fists clenched. If the awakening of a Logia type is an outward burst of elementalization, then the awakening of a mythical Zoan type is a reshaping process that occurs from the inside out, deep within the cells and flesh. Ace could clearly feel that the muscle fibers he had honed to their limits through years of hellish training were being torn apart by an ancient and powerful life force. Then, they would be reassembled in a denser and stronger form. Buzz! A beam of crimson and gold light shone from Ace's body. Immediately afterward, a cluster of flames, different from Sabo's orange-red flames, rose from Ace's shoulder. It was crimson and gold fire. The flames burned quietly, yet they carried an air of supreme majesty and an inexhaustible vitality. Ace, what kind of ability is this? Sabo turned his head, looking at the cluster of crimson gold divine fire, his voice filled with barely suppressed tremor. It's the same kind of fire, so why does your fire have such a strong life force? Ace did not answer. He slowly raised his head, and his pupils, which were originally human, had turned into dark gold vertical pupils. Crimson gold patterns, like the feathers of a divine bird, spread from his neck and the side of his face. A zoan-type bird fruit, mythical zoan type. Ace's deep voice echoed through the cave. As his words fell, the clothes on his broad back were instantly burned away. The next moment, two enormous wings, entirely formed from crimson gold solid flames, unfurled with a roar. In his human beast form, his wingspan exceeded 6 meters, with sharp, knife-like edges. Each slow flap left a trail of golden light in the air. Furthermore, Ace's arms and calves were also covered with a fine layer of crimson gold feathers. Those weren't ordinary feathers, they were more like a suit of divine fire armor that grew seamlessly into the skin. Vermilion Bird form. The moment Ace completed his half-beast transformation, the temperature inside the cave suddenly soared. The hard black rock beneath his feet began to glow red, then gradually melted into flowing lava. Before the waterfall could even fall, it was vaporized by the high temperature into a cloud of white mist. Even though Sabo had also become a fire-type user, he still had to cover his entire body with armament haki to barely withstand the terrifying heat wave. This temperature is ridiculous. Sabo looked up at Ace, who was bathed in crimson divine fire, his throat dry. At this moment, Ace no longer resembled a pirate who had just set sail, he was more like an ancient divine bird awakened from mythology. Ace stood quietly in the melting lava, feeling the seemingly inexhaustible vitality within him. After a moment, he reached out and pulled out the heavy machete stuck to the side. Without hesitation, Ace gripped the hilt of the sword with his other hand, letting the sharp blade slice across his left palm. A deep, bone-revealing wound appeared instantly. Blood gushed out, before it even had a chance to drip. Tch. A cluster of crimson gold nirvana flame spontaneously ignited at the wound. In less than the blink of an eye, the deep, bone-revealing wound was completely healed under the divine fire, leaving not a single scar. Even the minor, hidden injuries that had accumulated in his body from 5 years of frantic training were smoothed out by this life force. Super-fast regeneration, endless life. As long as this crimson gold divine fire remains burning, this body, already as powerful as a monster, will become an almost indestructible abyss. What a powerful fruit! Ace sheathed his great sword back into his waistband. The crimson gold wings on his back slowly retracted and merged into his body, and the feathered robes and divine markings covering his skin also disappeared. Except for his burned shirt, he once again appeared as a human youth. Let's go! Ace turned around and looked at the dense primeval jungle outside the cave. The inexhaustible, mythical power within him still surged. Since this vast ocean had offered such a generous gift, he naturally wanted to respond to this gift in the most direct way. This deserted island is large enough. Ace stepped out, his feet stomping on the still warm lava, making a hissing sound. Go outside and test the limits of our current destructive power. Chapter 11. An unnamed deserted island, deep in a primeval jungle. Boom! A thick, orange-red pillar of fire roared out, piercing through the jungle like an angry dragon, blasting the black rock hill, dozens of meters high, into a shower of rubble and scorched earth. The heat wave was intense, and the surrounding vegetation was reduced to ashes in an instant. What terrifying destructive power! Sabo stood on the scorched earth, looking at his still burning right arm, and finally let out a breath after a long while. He merely attempted to incorporate his domineering power techniques into the flames, yet the explosive destructive power displayed by the flame fruit already surpassed all the physical attacks he had painstakingly trained over the past 7 years. Not far from Sabo, Ace was sitting quietly cross-legged on a flat boulder. Before him lay the thigh of a freshly roasted ancient giant lizard. This deserted island had few other resources, but it was teeming with enormous, meaty beasts enough to keep them busy and expend their energy. Ace didn't rush to destroy the terrain. He stretched out his large right hand, and a cluster of pure crimson gold flames danced quietly in his palm. The crimson gold divine fire burned quietly. It wasn't as violent as Sabo's flames, nor did it produce billowing black smoke and crackling sounds, yet it instinctively instilled a sense of danger. As Ace looked at the crimson gold divine fire in his palm, he naturally thought of another top-tier mythical beast. Marco, the first division commander of the Whitebeard Pirates, possesses the phoenix fruit. Both are mythical birds of prey, and both possess near-immortal regenerative abilities. However, the phoenix's blue flames are more focused on healing and lack the high temperature and explosive power of true flames. The Vermilion Bird is different. It is not simply a fire of rebirth. It represents both destruction and rebirth. Ace flicked his finger, and the cluster of crimson gold divine fire in his palm landed on the black rock beside him. Sigh. There was no explosion. The hard black rock didn't even need to be heated to a red-hot state, it was directly vaporized into a wisp of white smoke by the high temperature. As Ace watched the wisp of white smoke dissipate, he finally confirmed his judgment. Extreme high temperature. Ultra-fast regeneration. This is what makes the Vermilion Bird fruit truly terrifying. Ace. In the distance, Sabo finished unleashing a barrage of firepower, dispelled his elemental form, and walked over with a satisfied expression. Although it was a newly acquired Logia-type ability, he was quite pleased with how smoothly he had used it on his first attempt. How does it feel? Ace picked up the huge piece of roasted meat and handed it over. Very strong, but it will take some time to get used to. Sabo took a big bite of the grilled meat, then stretched his slightly sore shoulders. While elemental transformation provides passive immunity to physical attacks, I still need to practice actively transforming myself when facing Haki. Sabo subconsciously rubbed his right shoulder blade. Ace's gaze calmly fell on Sabo's shoulder. He knew that those were the hidden injuries Sabo had sustained over the past 7 years of frantic training in order to catch up with his freakish physical abilities. Although the Dodden family provided herbal remedies, the subtle damage that reached the bone marrow was something that ordinary medical methods simply could not completely eradicate. Once Sabo develops his Haki to an extremely high level, these hidden injuries may become a fatal bottleneck preventing him from breaking through. Take off your clothes and turn around. Ace stood up, his tall figure casting a shadow in the sunlight. Hey? What? Although Sabo was puzzled, out of absolute trust in Ace, he obediently took off his tuxedo and turned his back to Ace. Ace stepped forward, raised his right hand, and a bright crimson gold flame instantly enveloped his entire palm. Don't move. Ace spoke calmly, his hand, burning with divine fire, pressing directly onto Sabo's right shoulder. Hiss. Sabo instinctively gasped, his body tensing instantly, fearing he would be burned by the terrifying heat. However, the next second, he froze. There was no burning pain as he had expected. The moment the crimson gold flames touched his body, they transformed into an extremely pure, gentle, and powerful warm current, like a hot spring, seeping directly into the depths of his shoulder blades through his skin pores. This is... Sabo froze on the spot. He could clearly feel the warm current coursing through his body. Those tiny tears and bone abrasions hidden deep within the gaps of muscle fibers, which he himself could hardly detect, were being healed and rebuilt at an incredible speed under the influence of this crimson flame. In just over 10 seconds, when Ace withdrew his hand, Sabo felt an unprecedented sense of ease and clarity in his entire right side. The heavy, sluggish feeling that had accompanied him for several years was completely swept away. Your flames can heal. Sabo turned around, looking at Ace as if he were a monster. He himself was a user of the flame fruit, he knew the properties of fire all too well. Fire could only bring destruction, how could it possibly bring new life? This is the power of the Vermilion Bird. Ace remained calm and offered no further explanation. He not only healed Sabo's shoulder but also smoothed out several other minor injuries within Sabo's body. You're the future first mate of Eclipse. Ace withdrew his hand. What if this hidden injury embarrasses me in the future? Ace picked up the large machete beside him and casually slung it over his shoulder. We'll stay on this island for the next 2 months. Ace's gaze swept across the endless primeval jungle, as if surveying an ideal training ground. Sufficient food, and no marine spies. The Eclipse doesn't need to set sail until its devil fruit power and haki are completely integrated. That suits me perfectly. Feeling his body fully restored to its peak condition, Sabo gripped the alloy staff tightly, his blue eyes blazing with fierce fighting spirit. The next 2 months were almost a disaster for this isolated, deserted island. Ace and Sabo stayed behind, completely unleashing their full potential. During the day, fires and roars constantly erupted from the depths of the jungle. At night, the cliffs were melted into flowing lava by the crimson divine fire, and the black rocks on the coast were shattered into pieces by the fiery fists. Those ancient beasts that once inhabited the island were completely reduced to sparring partners, targets, and food supplies for the two. Sabo's fire fist is now capable of destroying large ships head-on. Ace, meanwhile, continued to familiarize himself with the switching between half-beast and full-beast forms. The Vermilion Bird Divine Fire, combined with his superior physique and domineering aura, allows him to melt cliffs into flowing lava with every punch, wing flap, and slash. Until the day when the two of them had almost completely destroyed the island's ecosystem. On the deck of the Eclipse, by the coast. After 2 months of closed testing, the integration of physical skills, haki, and devil fruit abilities has been completely perfected. Ace donned a brand new dark red trench coat and stood at the bow of the ship. His tall figure appeared even more imposing and abyssal in the sea breeze, and the oppressive aura emanating from his every move was more restrained than it had been 2 months ago, yet even more suffocating. It's time to set off, Sabo. Let's weigh anchor. Ace looked at Sabo, who was standing at the helm, and calmly gave the order. Understood, Captain. Sabo adjusted his top hat and turned to walk toward the anchor. Understood, Captain. The heavy steel anchor was slowly pulled up, and the pure black mainsail roared to full size in the sea breeze. Like a long dormant black beast, the Eclipse finally tore through the thick fog of the southwestern sea, leaving the ravaged, nameless island far behind. Ace stood at the bow of the ship, calmly gazing at the faint outline of the town that appeared on the horizon. First stop, Orange Town. Chapter 12. East Blue Sea, Orange Town. This once bustling port town is now shrouded in choking smoke and deathly silence. In the town's central square, a group of pirates dressed in outlandish circus costumes were looting and plundering, their revelry echoing through the ruins. Captain Bucky, the town's vault has been completely emptied. A pirate henchman riding a unicycle reported loudly. In the center of the square, a man with a conspicuous red nose and wearing a heavy captain's coat sat on a magnificent chair, tossing a few gold coins in his hand. Here you go. Bucky the clown grinned, flipping gold coins between his fingers. Move everything of value onto my ship. Hurry up, don't give the Navy a chance to react. Yes, Captain Bucky. The pirates immediately cheered. Bucky was about to give the next order when he suddenly paused. Tap, tap. A series of steady footsteps echoed from the ruined streets at the edge of the square. The voice was neither hurried nor slow. But every step he took felt like stepping on the hearts of everyone in the square. Bucky's smile slowly faded. He's managed to survive in Donghai for so long, and it's not just because of his red nose and luck. His experience of encountering a real monster on the Grand Line gave him a far more acute intuition for danger than that of ordinary East Blue pirates. He turned his head sharply and looked towards the end of the street. Amidst the billowing smoke, 2 tall figures emerged. The man walking in front was wearing a dark red trench coat and was about 2.5 meters tall. His tall stature was unlike that of someone who would appear in the East Blue Sea. His broad, sturdy shoulders beneath the trench coat caused nearby pirates to instinctively take a half step back with every step he took. He ignored the henchman and fixed his gaze directly on Bucky. Beside him stood a blond young man dressed in a dark blue tuxedo, wielding a long alloy staff. Sabo. He was also over 2.4 meters tall, his top hat pulled low, and he had a gentle smile on his face, but the long cane in his hand made it impossible to mistake him for an ordinary noble young master. Who goes there? Kabeji, the strategist of the Buggy Pirates, drew his long sword and shouted sharply. How dare you meddle in the affairs of the Buggy Pirates? The animal trainer, Machi, patted the giant lion Leaky, whose size was comparable to a house, next to him. Leaky growled, his sharp fangs gleaming coldly in the smoke. Fire! Kabeji raised his sword and pointed it. Turn those two reckless bastards into a swarm of bees. Dozens of musketeers around immediately raised their flintlock muskets, their dark muzzles aimed at Ace and Sabo. Surrounded by dozens of people, Ace neither drew his sword nor stopped. He simply raised his gaze and swept it across the square. The next moment, the air seemed to sink. There were no strong whines. There was no explosion. But the pirates who had raised their guns seemed to have their throats grabbed at the same time, and their movements froze on the spot. An invisible pressure descended upon Ace. After 2 years of honing his skills, he can now precisely control the release and application of his Conqueror's haki. The oppressive force did not affect the civilians hiding in the distance, it only fell on the pirates in the square. Thump! The first pirate rolled his eyes and collapsed. Then came the second, and the third. Thump! 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 Those pirate henchmen who were just laughing and looting didn't even have time to scream before they foamed at the mouth and collapsed unconscious on the ground. Kabeji's hand gripping the sword trembled violently, and the fierce look on his face instantly turned into terror. The giant lion Leaky beside Machi let out a mournful cry, and its massive body crashed to the ground. In just 2 seconds. In the vast orange town square, the Buggy Pirates, numbering over 100, were completely wiped out. Besides Ace and Sabo, the only other person left in the entire square was a red-nosed clown who was still barely sitting in a chair, his legs trembling like a leaf. Conqueror's haki. Bucky's expression changed instantly. He certainly recognized that power. On that ship back then, he saw people who truly stood at the top of the sea, and he also saw the domineering aura that only kings possess. But the problem is, this is the East Blue Sea. Why would such a monster appear in the East Blue Sea? Ace walked step by step towards Buggy. The tall figure blocked the sunlight from the square and also weighed down the ornate chair. Hey, Red Nose! Ace looked down at him. My ship happens to be short of someone to manage logistics and miscellaneous tasks. From today onwards, you are my conscript. Bucky's eye twitched. Red Nose? Another Red Nose. The fear is real. But those 3 words still made the veins on his forehead bulge. Are you kidding me? Bucky's face turned pale, but his body was torn to pieces in the next instant. Despite his fear, he wasn't going to sit idly by and wait to die. Several arms holding daggers flew out from different directions, circling towards Ace's neck and back. Scattered into pieces, a sneak attack. However, Ace simply tilted his head. Buggy's innate observation haki had already locked onto his true form. He raised his right hand, covered in armament haki, and through the flying limbs, grabbed the collar of the Pakistani body. Bang! Bucky was slammed hard into the cobblestones of the square, sending shards of stone flying. Ouch! 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 UBD! Before he could finish his curse, Ace's fist had already landed. Bang! 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 There was no divine fire, nor any superfluous techniques. With just his sheer physical strength and armament haki, he beat Buggy black and blue, with tears and snot streaming down his face. Less than 10 seconds later, the danger alarms in Bucky's head were about to explode. He knew all too well that this kind of monster couldn't be taken down head-on. Only by surviving and leaving alive can one have a chance to turn the tide. Stop, stop, stop. I admit defeat. Bucky clutched his head and yelled. The butler, hey? Fine. I'll be it, okay. Ace stopped punching and flicked his wrist. Bucky lay sprawled on the broken stone slab, his face swollen as if Licky had stepped on him, but his red nose still stubbornly stuck out in the center of his face. Sabo walked over to Ace, looked at the disheveled clown on the ground, and frowned slightly. Ace, this guy isn't that strong, but his devil fruit ability is quite interesting. He paused. But are they really qualified to be our partners? Sabo, you can't judge a person by their outward strength. Ace didn't explain immediately, but just looked down at Bucky. This red-nosed guy is indeed cowardly, greedy, and vain, he's also no match for him in a direct fight. But what Ace was after wasn't his current fighting strength. In the course of the future he knew, this guy possessed an almost outrageous luck. The more chaotic and dangerous the situation, the easier it is for Pakistan to survive. He could even inexplicably entice a group of desperados to his side, making them wholeheartedly follow him and go mad together. For someone who intends to build a powerful force in the future, this kind of talent is even rarer than a cadre who is simply good at fighting. Let Bucky handle miscellaneous tasks, fool his subordinates, become a scapegoat, and even break the deadlock with that absurd luck at crucial moments. In this world, it's probably impossible to find a more suitable candidate than Bucky the Joker. Listen, Red Nose. Ace snapped out of his thoughts and pointed to the unconscious Kabeji, Machi, and Lee around him. I will not kill your crew. Bucky paused for a moment. He had initially thought that this monster would easily wipe out the entire Buggy Pirates crew. But next, we're heading to the Grand Line. Ace looked at him, his tone flat. I might even go to the cruelest new world. With this group of people who can't even withstand the aftershocks of Conqueror's haki, following you will only lead to their deaths. Bucky's lips moved, but he didn't immediately refute. He was afraid of dying. Greedy. Loves to show off. However, he wasn't entirely without feelings for his subordinates who had followed him for many years, such as Kabeji, Machi, and Leaky. Ace continued. Disperse them. Leave them some money. Tell them that if one day they truly have the courage and the ability to step into the new world alive, they can come to you under my banner at any time. Bucky lay on the ground, silent for a moment. He looked at Kabeji and Machi, who had collapsed not far away, and then at Lee, who was also unconscious, his teeth grinding together. He knew Ace wasn't joking. If they really did reach the Grand Line, or even the New World, the Buggy Pirates, in their current state, probably wouldn't even be able to survive the first storm. In addition, seeing Bucky's grief-stricken expression, Ace changed his tone. Don't keep eyeing Donghai's pitiful pocket money. Bucky's ears twitched. As long as you obediently manage the logistics and miscellaneous tasks for me, the most precious treasures and gold on this vast ocean will pile up at your feet in the future. Ace paused for a moment. What's Captain John's treasure compared to this? Upon hearing the words treasure and gold, Bucky's tearful face froze instantly. Treasure. He suddenly raised his head, and his swollen, bluish eyes regained their brightness. More than Captain John's treasure. I never lie. Ace turned around, his dark red trench coat billowing in the smoke. Take your money and get on my boat. Bucky got up from the ground and wiped the blood from his nose. He glanced at Ace's retreating figure, then at the unconscious Kabeji, Machi, and Lee on the ground. Finally, he gritted his teeth. Kabeji, Machi, Leaky. Bucky muttered something under his breath. Then, he turned around abruptly and began frantically stuffing the gold and treasure he had just stolen into several large sacks. Pack them all up, everyone. This is their severance pay. He pretended to be innocent while muttering curses. Damn it! I'll get my revenge sooner or later. I'll remember this grudge against Red Nose. Sabo watched him cry while stuffing money into his pocket and couldn't help but rub his temples. Ace, are you sure this guy won't turn our logistics into a disaster? Ace looked at Bucky and chuckled. Rest assured. Those who are greedy for money are the best at accounting. That's all. Bucky, the 1,000 Tails transformation who will stir up the ocean in the future, was forcibly appointed by Ace as the chief clerk of the Eclipse. Chapter 13. Evening, at the port of Orange Town. Clang. Several heavy sacks filled with gold and jewels were thrown onto the spacious deck of the Eclipse. Bucky wiped the sweat from his forehead, his bruised and swollen face still showing signs of lingering fear. But when he looked up and truly saw the internal structure of the sailboat, his small eyes widened in surprise. The precious ironwood deck was polished to a spotless finish, the living room was covered with soft silk carpets, and behind the open cabin door, one could see a complete set of expensive leather sofas and a temperature-controlled wine cellar. Is this some kind of royal family's guerrilla warship? Bucky swallowed hard. As a former trainee on Roger's ship, he had seen many storms. But the budget he'd poured into the ship's enjoyment and quality still left this greedy pirate feeling parched. It seems getting on this ship wasn't all bad. Bucky was secretly making plans in his mind. If I could demonstrate even a little seafaring experience, getting a private, cushioned room in this spacious living quarters, and enjoying fine wine every day, might not be so bad. With that thought in mind, Bucky straightened his back, cleared his throat, and prepared to walk towards the set of leather sofas that looked excessively comfortable. Snap! A wooden mop and a wooden bucket filled with seawater were thrown right at Bucky's feet. Bucky was stunned. He looked down at the mop, then looked up along the wooden handle. Sabo stood to the side, his top hat pulled low, but his shoulders twitched slightly. Beside Sabo, Ace leaned against the cabin door, tossing an orange in his hand and smiling as if he had been waiting to see this scene. Hey, Red Nose! Ace grinned, revealing a set of white teeth. At this moment, he had completely lost the imposing aura that had overwhelmed people in the square, and instead resembled a big boy preparing to play a prank. Given the considerable amount of treasure you've brought, as captain, I've decided to formally bestow upon you a special title aboard the Eclipse. Bucky's eyes lit up immediately upon hearing exclusive title, and all his previous frustration vanished. Could it be the first mate? No, that kid in the top hat clearly boarded the ship earlier. Then he should at least be a naval commander, or a minister in charge of treasure management. Bucky was secretly overjoyed, but forced a reserved expression on his face. From today onwards, you are the chief general manager of our Eclipse. Ace announced with a loud laugh. Chief? Head of Miscellaneous Affairs. Bucky paused for 2 seconds, then suddenly realized what was happening. That sounds like a fancy name, but doesn't it just translate to high-class deck cleaning errand boy? Are you kidding me? Bucky was so angry he jumped up and down, pointing at the mop on the floor, about to explode. I am the mighty overlord of the East Sea, with a bounty of millions, and you actually want me to do this kind of thing? Ha ha ha! Don't be so stingy, Bucky. Ace darted over and patted Bucky on the shoulder with practiced ease. The blow was forceful, causing Bucky's knees to buckle and nearly causing him to kneel on the spot. How can a great pirate ship be without a great steward? Ace laughed loudly while spouting nonsense with a straight face. This is a crucial position that reflects the entire ship's image. As he spoke, he casually stuffed the orange into Bucky's mouth. The deck is yours tonight. Good job, and you'll get a bonus tomorrow. Bucky had an orange in his mouth, and his eyes twitched violently. He really wanted to throw the mop in Ace's face. But when he thought of the monster beating him up in the square, Bucky forced himself to suppress the urge. In the end, he could only bite into the orange and pick up the mop from the ground with a pitiful expression. Late at night. On the vast east blue sea, the eclipse rose and fell gently with the waves. The entire ship fell silent. In the shadows of the deck, a red-nosed creature cautiously peeked out. "A bunch of arrogant brats, do you really think you can trap me?" Bucky gave a soft, cold snort. He clutched a small cloth bag tightly in his hand, containing several exquisite rubies that he had secretly smuggled from the pile of treasure while cleaning. He glanced at the dark cabin. In his mind, those two idiot brats were probably fast asleep in their luxurious bedroom right now. "I, your humble servant, am a free spirit who ate the chop fruit. As long as my feet stay on the boat, my upper body can fly through the air. In this vast darkness, as long as I fly out of this ship's range and drift on any rock, who can catch me?" Bucky laughed silently with smug satisfaction, genuinely proud of his flawless escape plan. Torn apart. Bucky took a deep breath and activated the power of the chop fruit. His feet remained on the deck, but his upper body, carrying the small cloth bag full of jewels, silently rose into the air and drifted towards the sea outside the ship's side. "Ha ha ha! Goodbye, you two stupid brats! I'm off to find Captain John's treasure." Bucky's upper body floated happily in the night sky, several meters above the sea. Just as he was preparing to deliver his farewell speech in his heart. "Hey, Bucky, out night flying in the middle of the night, hey!" A familiar laugh, tinged with a hint of teasing, suddenly came from Bucky's right. "The moonlight is truly beautiful tonight. Hey!" Bucky was so frightened his eyes nearly popped out of their sockets, and he abruptly turned his head. A dozen meters above the sea, Ace, who had no wings, was seen with his arms crossed, and muffled thuds of air popping from beneath his feet. He walked on air, like taking a leisurely stroll after a meal, steadily following beside Bucky. They even had the leisure to scrutinize Bucky's upper body as it floated in mid-air. You, how are you in the sky?" Bucky screamed as if he'd seen a ghost. "I couldn't sleep anyway, so I came out for a walk." Ace grinned, leaned closer, and poked Bucky's severed waist with his finger. "Wow, this devil fruit ability is amazing. Not a drop of blood, just like a cut block. Don't touch me." Bucky was terrified and flew frantically to the side, trying to create some distance. However, no matter how fast he flew, Ace could always keep up. The black-haired youth walked with moon-like steps, always keeping a steady half-meter distance from him, as if strolling on the sea. "Are you flying so slowly, waiting for the wind?" As Ace flew alongside, he couldn't help but laugh and make sarcastic remarks. "Or is there a limit to your abilities? What happens if you fly too far off the deck? Do you fall into the sea and become shark food?" "A demon. You're absolutely a demon." Bucky completely lost his composure. He did everything he could to turn, accelerate, and even circle in the air. But Ace stayed by his side the whole time, with that amused smile on his face. A dozen minutes later, exhausted and disoriented from flying, Bucky finally stopped in despair. He realized a harsh reality. Faced with this monster whose stamina, speed, and observation haki were ridiculously strong, his scattering escape tactics were simply a joke. Not running anymore. Ace stopped next to Bucky, hovering in midair and watching him. I just came out for some fresh air." Bucky's upper body stiffened in midair in a salute, 2 tears of humiliation hanging from the corners of his eyes. "While you're at it, check the surrounding area for any enemy activity, Captain." "Ha ha ha." Ace burst into laughter. "He truly deserves to be the chief errand manager I've chosen, he's incredibly dedicated." As he spoke, he grabbed Bucky by the back of his collar and, as if carrying a chick, used moonwalk to easily lift Bucky's upper body back onto the deck of the Eclipse. Bang! Bucky's upper body and his feet, which were still on the deck, were safely reattached. "All right, go to bed early after your inspection. Ace chuckled and flicked Bucky's red nose. I still need to clean the living room windows tomorrow morning. UBD. Don't you dare touch my nose. Bucky instinctively covered his nose, so angry he almost jumped up. But Ace had already turned around and was leisurely walking towards the cabin. He did not pursue the escape, nor did he confiscate the bag of rubies. Just like that mid-air chase earlier, it was just a joke to pass the time before bed. Standing in the night wind, Bucky watched Ace's retreating figure, then looked down at the bag of rubies in his hand that hadn't been taken away, and froze on the spot. This ridiculously powerful guy clearly saw through everything, yet he neither killed him nor took his treasure. Even when he was teasing Bucky in mid-air, that carefree laughter reminded him for a moment of a man from long ago who would also laugh loudly on the deck. Are you kidding me? Bucky shook his head violently. I would never associate such a BD with Captain Roger. He grabbed the rag from the ground angrily, still cursing under his breath. Damn it! I won't be bought off by such a small favor. Washing windows, hey? I'll do it. But this is only temporary. Under the cover of night, the Eclipse continued its journey. Its newly appointed chief janitor, while grumbling and cursing, picked up the rag again. As for the matter of escaping, Bucky decided to wait until at least tomorrow. Chapter 14. The next morning, sunlight streamed onto the deck of the Eclipse. Wipe the left side, wipe the right side. Damn it, why am I even cleaning windows here? Bucky, muttering to himself, diligently wiped the living room's French windows until they shone brightly. On the other side of the deck, Sabo sat under a parasol reading a newspaper. Ace sat cross-legged on the deck, holding a bottle of top-quality sake that he had taken from the temperature-controlled wine cellar. Pirates should drink sake heartily. Ace wholeheartedly agreed with this. He poured 2 glasses of sake, picked up one and drank it all in one gulp, then turned to look at Bucky, who was still wiping the windows. Hey, Bucky, come over for a drink. Ace picked up another wooden cup filled with sake and casually greeted it. Bucky paused, his throat bobbing involuntarily. He was really thirsty after being tossed and turned for most of the night. He cautiously approached, took the glass, and looked at Ace with some wariness. Captain, what trick are you planning to pull now? Please sit down. Ace patted the deck next to him. Bucky hesitated for a moment, then sat down timidly. He had just brought the sake to his lips when he heard Ace suddenly ask. Back on the USS Oro Jackson, between you and Shanks, who got beaten up more? Pfft. Bucky spat out the mouthful of sake he had just taken a sip. He abruptly took 2 steps back, pointing at Ace, his tongue almost tied in knots. How did you know I used to be on Captain Roger's ship? This is top secret intelligence in the East Blue Sea. Sabo, who was reading a newspaper nearby, also put down his newspaper and looked over. He knew Bucky was a pirate from the East Blue, but he never expected that this red-nosed guy would have such a background. Ace didn't keep anyone in suspense. He picked up his glass, looked at the clear liquid inside, and spoke calmly. Isn't it normal to know this kind of thing? After all, that man who wears a straw hat and always has a wide grin is my biological father. The sea breeze seemed to pause for a moment at that instant. Ding dong. Bucky dropped the wooden cup in his hand onto the deck, spilling sake all over the floor. He seemed to be frozen in place, his entire body stiffening as he stared intently at the black-haired youth before him, his mind completely blank. Biological father. Bucky's voice was trembling. You mean that Pirate King, Gold Roger? Ah. Ace nodded. My mother's name is Portgas D. I took my mother's surname, but by blood, I am indeed that BD's son. His tone was calm. Instead of the original aversion and distortion of bloodline in her destiny, there was a kind of openness that came from complete acceptance. That's impossible, the captain clearly already. Bucky shook his head frantically. But when his gaze actually landed on Ace's face, his voice slowly stopped. The contours of the eyebrows and eyes. That fearless attitude. And last night, when I was chasing him through the air, that carefree, heartless laughter that made me both hate and helpless. All the fragments of memory suddenly pieced together in Bucky's mind. The image of that person standing at the bow of the ship, laughing amidst the raging wind and rain, now overlapped with that of the young man before me. No wonder. Bucky murmured. No wonder it felt so familiar last night. His eyes suddenly reddened. Large tears welled up in his eyes, mixing with snot, making his clown-painted face a complete mess. Why, Captain! Captain, you actually have a son! Bucky collapsed onto the deck and began to wail uncontrollably. He was greedy, afraid of death, concerned about his reputation, and always had a sharp tongue. But after all, he was once an apprentice in Roger's pirate crew. No matter how many years have passed, there will always be a place in his heart that no one can touch, for the man who showed him the end of the sea. Seeing that the old captain's bloodline not only lives on but has grown into such an absurdly powerful monster, Bucky's defenses crumbled instantly. Ace looked at Buggy, who was lying on the deck and crying, and did not interrupt him. He simply poured himself another glass of sake and sipped it slowly. This is one of the reasons why he wanted to bring Bucky on board. On this vast ocean, besides retired old guys like Rayleigh, the only ones who would consider him one of their own, based solely on his status as Roger's son, are probably Shanks and this red-nosed guy in front of him. Bucky cried for a good 10 minutes before finally lifting his head, sobbing, and wiping his face haphazardly. Young master, no, Captain Ace. Bucky hesitated for a moment before addressing him, but his attitude clearly changed. The initial fear instilled by force was still there, but there was also a mix of inexplicable excitement and awkward intimacy. Since you're Captain Roger's son, shouldn't we go find One Piece? Bucky got more and more excited as he spoke, forgetting to even wipe his snot. To inherit the old captain's name, and incidentally, to seize all the world's treasures. One Piece? Ace put down his glass and chuckled softly. Bucky, I'm not interested in that old man's great treasure. If I happen to be passing through Laugh-Tale someday, I could stop by and take a look. But I went to sea not to follow the same old path he took. He stood up as he spoke. The sea breeze ruffled the dark red trench coat. What I want to be is the world king who can overthrow the world government and establish new rules. Bucky opened his mouth, but couldn't say anything for a long time. Overthrow the world government? King of the world? If someone else had said that, he would have laughed until his stomach hurt. But the young man before them was none other than Captain Roger's son. He was a monster who, at just 17, could overwhelm the entire plaza with his conqueror's haki. Bucky suddenly realized that he seemed to have boarded a ship that was more dangerous than he had imagined. Moreover, this ship seems to be heading in a direction even more troublesome than the Pirate King. Since that's the case, Bucky sniffed, put his hands on his hips, and struck a pose of arrogance once more. I'll reluctantly assist you. Well, I owe the old captain a favor. Very good. Ace turned around, looked at Bucky who had regained his smugness, and chuckled. Since you were once on Roger's ship, and now you're one of my crew members, you naturally can't bring shame to the Eclipse Pirates. Bucky's smug expression suddenly froze. He instinctively sensed something was wrong. Ace stepped forward, grabbed Bucky's shoulder, and pointed to Sabo, who had put down his newspaper and was flexing his wrists. Starting today, physical training will be conducted every morning, and fruit ability development will be carried out every afternoon. I will personally teach you observation haki and armament haki. How much you can learn depends on your own abilities. Ha! Bucky's expression instantly froze. No need, no need. I'm a genius, I fight with my brains and the Bucky barrage. Besides, my chop fruit grants me natural immunity to slashing attacks, which is already perfect, there's no need to develop it. Protest invalid. Sabo walked over with a smile, gently tapping his palm with the alloy rod in his hand. Buggy, although your devil fruit grants immunity to slashing attacks, without mastering observation haki to anticipate attacks or using armament haki to enhance the destructive power of your split parts, you won't survive more than 3 days in the New World. I'm not going to the New World. Bucky screamed on the spot. I want to stay in the East Sea and be the Mountain King. Before he could finish speaking, Bucky was lifted up by Ace with one hand and tossed like a chick into the open space in the center of the deck. Let's warm up by running 500 laps around the deck first. Ace gave the order with a smile. Sabo, keep an eye on him. No breakfast until he finishes the run. Understood, Captain. Sabo nodded with a smile. Help. This is abuse. On the Eclipse at dawn, the shrill yet energetic screams of the red-nosed clown echoed through the air. Ace picked up his sake glass, leaned against the ship's railing, watched Buggy being chased all over the deck by Sabo, and downed the sake in one gulp. The sea breeze was slightly cool. But at this moment, the Eclipse finally had a bit of the real feel of a pirate crew. Chapter 15. 2 weeks later. East Sea, the bustling commercial island of Porto Royana, known as the free trade capital. As dusk fell, a medium-sized fast ship, as conspicuous as a black sword, slowly sailed into the port's top-class private berth. The Eclipse's streamlined teardrop-shaped hull and understated luxury craftsmanship attracted many discreet glances from the dock the moment it entered.